The 2 years of the pandemic, the 3 waves of COVID-19 were supposed to be denting India. They would have wreaked a kind of havoc which many naysayers believed India would never recover from. But the story is something totally different altogether. Joining us now is the author of A Nation to Protect, Priyam Gandhi-Mody. Priyamji, namaste. Let me first start with what brought forth the idea towards such an endeavor.
Right, absolutely. So right from the time the pandemic began, in March 2020, we really had inherited very weak health infrastructure, and we essentially lacked all tools that a country needs to fight a once-in-a-century global pandemic. In a situation like that, over time, it appeared that not only have we done better than most wealthier nations, far better equipped than us, but we're sort of leading the fight from the front. So this is not this is not by chance. This is by meticulous planning, and that needed to be brought to fore.
When you started the process of writing this book, where did you start from? Were we as a nation anywhere prepared to tackle a pandemic of this kind? Was our country ready for a national lockdown and the challenges that it would bring?
Right. So I wanted to start from a top. I wanted to give it a top-down approach, right? Because most of the policies, the Prime Minister has led the entire effort from the front. So that was where I wanted to start without a doubt, and I wanted to see how that effort trickled down on ground. So yeah.
As you wrote this book, did you realize the kind of command, respect and attention that Prime Minister has to shut down an entire nation, to tell a nation we are not prepared, we need to lock down so that we can be prepared, and for the nation to respond in such a positive manner? That is significant. Very few nations have been able to achieve what we in India have been able to do.
Right, right. And many leaders were facing a lot of challenges around the world with that, about the various mandates that they wanted to impose, and the country is just simply not willing to follow those mandates. So in that respect, the country really rallied behind the Prime Minister, and Janta Curfew was like the first rice test of the entire country trusting their lives in the hands of the Prime Minister.
Have you covered this aspect that many across the world, and some within the country too, wanted Modi to fail? They wanted the government under Modi to be inept at handling the pandemic, from response to the virus to development of the vaccine and the vaccination program itself.
See, Mr. Narasimhan, why did everybody want India to fail? Now, this is something that we must think about. They wanted India to fail, or much rather they expected India to fail, because they've seen the India of the past 7 decades, right? That's the thought process that they come on the table with. That's my first point. Second point, as we started to emerge stronger than most of these Western nations, where most of this negative media uproar came from, obviously that ruffles feathers, and when feathers are ruffled, there are always, there's always a section of motivated media, of motivated people who benefit from this. They benefit out of division in the society, and those sections constantly, even today, they try to bring the country down. But I think there's a larger section of people who want the country to succeed.
What the government and the system itself has been able to achieve is also significant, Priyamji, because we as a nation, ministries, even departments, they all work in silos. Coordination, getting them all to act in unison is no mean achievement.
Right. See, even here, it's not a one-time effort. You see, so, and this is a question I was able to ask the Prime Minister. So I will give you that response that I heard from him. That ever since he took office, he realized that our bureaucracy was file sensitive, and that it wasn't life sensitive, which meant that the bureaucrats worked in their own silos. So when he came to office, one of the first things that he did was to create these to create these small groups of bureaucrats, with one who have, and give them one target, and he would put various senior bureaucrats from various ministries together to work on that one single target. So that encouraged a lot of group effort. That and then the bureaucrats started to realize how the Prime Minister kind of wanted to do things as well. So he's been working on this, on fixing this system, over the last 7 years that he's been Prime Minister. And I think that's what kind of worked in our favor when the pandemic hit us.
You said you spoke to the Prime Minister about it. Did it surprise him, the way the nation responded, the kind of support he got for the initiatives?
Yes. So I'm sure at the beginning, in his mind as well, just like most other world leaders,
yes,
he probably questioned how much trust the people would place in his decisions. But after the response to the Janta curfew, the overwhelming response to the Janta curfew, he was pretty sure that the people were willing to trust his decisions. Having said that, as the pandemic progressed, we saw several opposition rule states trying to create, and the migrants issue was one of the first major issues that was, it was a humanitarian crisis which was politically exploited for obvious political gain. Imagine what good would have come out from sending migrants who are potentially infected with a new virus, whose characteristics we at that point didn't know anything about. What was the benefit of sending them to areas that have very, very weak infrastructure, health infrastructure? Those areas would have gotten so easily overwhelmed, and bodies would have just piled on in the rural parts of the country. But the opposition still, exploited this issue, to their gain. Even the Western media rallied behind that.
Was there at some point a stark realization that this pandemic has actually exposed the underbelly of our healthcare system, how inept we were? Was there an understanding internally?
Absolutely, and I think that work. In the first 2-3 months after the pandemic, that work happened. The facilities and the infrastructure was augmented at groundbreaking speed, because of which by 1st of May the government was able to start the Shramik trains and start to send the migrants back to their villages. But you see, not only send them back, but to also identify their skills and place them, give them employment. And now you can see by the increased uptake in the Manrega numbers that they have been successfully placed.
Was there an understanding, or perhaps back of the mind realization, that this pandemic could bring India down to its knees? And it was a mammoth challenge, and especially with many outside the country and also within the country hoping that happens and that India suffers under Modi.
Right. I mean, I think obviously that thought was there when the lockdown was announced, that if we are not able to augment our medical infrastructure, and if we are not able to increase productions of the essential tools, the medicines, the masks, the ventilators, the PPE kits, if we're not vaccines, if we're not able to augment production of these very, very important tools that the country would need to fight the pandemic, we are going to fail. There was no question about that. For how long are you going to rely on importing these things from other countries?
Now, the first wave was when nobody knew anything, Priyamji. But the second wave was lethal. Was the government prepared? Was there an admission internally that perhaps did some groups jump the gun?
Yes, I did. And it absolutely was a thought process with which he worked. So, in fact, let me give you an anecdote. So I had asked him where he finds his strength from, to deal with such a massive pandemic, and where did he find the strength to kind of just keep going amongst all that negativity for our country? And he said, well, when things went virtual, so when the meetings and everything went virtual, he said, I had some time on my hands, so I was able to think about all the people that I've met over the years. The last man, and he's traveled extensively through the length and breadth of the country. So he would think about those people. They could be, grocery shop owners, they could be farmers, they could be businessmen, they could be karyakartas, they could be people from the RSS family, they could be anybody. But he would think about, a specific individual, and then he would try to imagine that with the lockdown and everything, how, and with the pandemic, like how his or her life would have changed, and he would try to imagine that new life of that person, and then he would call up that person and to check on his well-being, and then he would try to match what he envisioned versus what the reality is. And that's how a lot of his that's how he found a lot of his strength and also motivation to make policies that would touch lives of the last men.
Let's talk about the oxygen crisis, because the second wave brought forth the oxygen crisis. Just around the time we were talking up the vaccine, the oxygen crisis was new. The system's response to quickly convert industrial oxygen into liquid medical oxygen to reach the supplies was critical. But there was also talk that there were deliberately some tensions triggered, and there were certain pockets, let's say Delhi and some other regions, which somewhere artificially created an oxygen crisis.
Absolutely, without a doubt. I mean, look, there is one aspect that one of the primary characteristics of the Delta variant is that it penetrates into the lung and it causes difficulty in breathing, and which is why the oxygen requirement goes up.
Right.
So that was natural, right? However, as the country came together to meet requirements of the people, there were governments like the Delhi government, which is led by Kejriwal ji, that demanded 4-5 times more oxygen than they required. Now look at the other opposition. I'm not even saying that make a comparison to BJP states. Let's not do that. Look at the other opposition states. Look at Maharashtra, look at Kerala. When they had numbers which were akin to the Delhi numbers, they required oxygen, which the amount of oxygen which was 4 or 5 times lesser than what the Delhi government was demanding. And the Delhi government was not even demanding it from the center. They demanded only about 400 metric tons from the center. The rest of the demands they were placing in the court. So what was happening is that the very senior bureaucrats who were overseeing the mobilization and generation of oxygen, they had to be sitting through court proceedings every day for 4 and 5 hours. Now, is that a judicious use of time during a global pandemic when a nation is passing through a wave? I think not.
So what was the response? What was priority? How did the government, the system calibrate a response for this?
So the center was constantly in touch with the states. This was happening on the level of bureaucrats. So they had a formula depending on how many new cases were coming in, how much oxygen they would require. And this was a very dynamic, conversation-based, mobilization of oxygen.
Through the course of your research for the book, did you realize, was there a sort of realization within the system itself that there was more damage being done by those who were spreading misinformation, pushing false propaganda narratives? Why was there not effort concentrated towards countering that and also putting an end to this kind of propaganda? Because somewhere one got the sense more damage was being done because of that.
Look, I mean, I think at that point all hands were on deck to get the nation out of this fatal wave.
Focus on the problem.
So very few counter efforts were happening to tackle the propaganda in particular, and some of those efforts were even counterproductive, I want to say. Because the machinery was really busy, trying to get because the Prime Minister's mandate was to try to get the country out of the pandemic first, and we'll see about the propaganda later. So you're right, and people were waiting like vultures to, to pounce on this tragedy. But once, if I may go back, look at the situation that happened in Delhi. Look at, they had no accountability of how much oxygen went to the refillers, how much went to the hospitals. They were sending tankers back after demanding it from courts. So it was such a pity to see that.
Many believe, and many have been told, even I've been told, that the Prime Minister was actually relentless. He stopped all social engagements, even salutations and commemorations, everything. His effort was only getting on top of the pandemic. Is that true?
No, I don't think that our response would have been nearly close to what it has been if it hadn't been for Prime Minister Modi.
Okay.
Second, it absolutely is a template for many nations, including the wealthier, the bigger nations. So while I was doing my research, I read that the United States, in the Oval Office, I think they have a book for the president, which kind of passes on from one president to the next about how to handle the country during, a pandemic or a global crisis like that. So they have that handbook which passes on, from one president to the other. So I think this is kind of like a handbook, this is the handbook, and Prime Minister Modi has created it for, future leadership.
Let's come to the vaccine part. Developing a vaccine, a nation which was perceived to have, which will succumb to the pandemic, which will come down to its knees, for it to actually manufacture 2 vaccines within 9 to 11 months of the pandemic itself is no mean achievement. So how did that process happen? When did the process begin?
I have covered that in the book. There were a multitude of meetings that he was constantly having, and in fact, I recall one of his aides also said to me that we were coming to office every day, we were coming to the PMO every day, we were sitting in separate rooms and doing virtual meetings, but we were still coming to the PMO every day because we couldn't sleep at night, because we knew that so many lives depended on us. And he also went on to say that he would be present with the Prime Minister on in most of these meetings, and they just feel so fatigued with so much negativity, but yet the Prime Minister would just keep going, keep the energy going, and with a determination to get out of the crisis first.
Well, there is also the aspect of vaccine politics, because there was a lot of misinformation, confusion. We will source it, you don't source it. And the second wave, suddenly they said shift the focus away from 60 plus, 25 to 44 need the vaccines, we need more vaccines. How did the government calibrate a response? Did they realize that there were mischief mongers deliberately trying to create vaccine hesitancy?
Absolutely. I remember, at a time when there was an entire, outcry about vaccine shortage, and when we had just begun our vaccination drive, there were so many articles that said that India will take a decade to vaccinate its population, and so on and so forth. You'll probably remember that too. But let's come to the development of the vaccines first, because that is a very important process. And the Prime Minister started that from April 2020, less than a month after the pandemic hit us. You see, and he encouraged, he and his team, they encouraged manufacturers, whether they were Indian, whether they were foreign, to come to make the vaccine here, to develop the vaccine here, right from April 2020. So when there was an outcry that there were no orders placed, la-di-da, what was that about? Because, the government had been interacting with almost every vaccine manufacturer, Indian and, foreign, and committing to funds with proof of concept and orders whenever they required money. So that is the development part of it. Now let's come to the administration part of it. Right from the beginning, so when we knew that we were going to have 2 solid vaccines at least, we knew that that supply would be back-ended, which would mean that in the later part of 2021 we would see a dynamic increase and a rapid increase in supply of vaccines. So we operated with that assumption. We planned our vaccination drive with that assumption. Which is why we put our most vulnerable, our frontline workers, and the essential service workers and the senior citizens first, because we needed to secure them first when we knew that we had a limited number of doses. And it's not like the states didn't know that. When the center was constantly communicating with the states were, being informed very, very regularly about, the supply of vaccines. But again, this issue was very, very highly politicized, like you know.
Now, Priyamji, what's the way forward? Because this is not going to be the last of the pandemics. Although the third wave did not do the kind of damage that many expected because of the vaccination and our preparedness, and it was contagious but not lethal. But this may not be the last pandemic. So what's the way going forward?
Right. I mean, the center had been communicating with vaccine manufacturers from April 2020. But when the states came together and demanded that, let us purchase these vaccines, why are you controlling it? The center opened it up and said that, hey, go ahead and do that. We don't have a problem with that. But obviously they knew how these manufacturers work, because they'd been talking to them for for about a year by then, right? So and then what did the states have to do? They had to go back to the center and say that, hey, sorry, we were not able to procure anything, you do it for us. Right, so that's when the center took on all of the responsibility and went ahead with the vaccine drive that we see in its current form. But let me go back to your vaccine hesitancy. Even for vaccine, it's not that naturally there was no vaccine hesitancy in India. There were enough and more efforts to instigate such anti-vax movements here as well. Look at what, let's talk about Mr. Akhilesh Yadav. When the government allowed the emergency use for Covaxin and Covishield, he says, I'm not going to take this vaccine, I don't trust these vaccines. And there are studies now with data to show that the SP strongholds, the vaccine uptake uptakes remained very, very low up until the point that he and his father had to publicly take the vaccine. Even then, no lessons learned. And when he started the campaign trail a few months ago for this current round of elections, he went to the media and he said, I'm not going to take the second shot of the vaccine. I've not taken let me requote, I've not taken the second shot of the vaccine. So that is very irresponsible politics and clearly aimed to create this anti-vax sort of a movement. Let me give you another example. Several Congress leaders as well, so a member of parliament had tweeted that why are we not asking for the United Kingdom for more data on Covishield. Then another one from the Congress said, why is Covaxin given regulatory approval? What was the hurry? What was the rush? So there was a concerted effort to bring down all of our vaccine candidates at that point. Not just one. They weren't only targeting Covaxin. They were also targeting Covishield. So they were trying to fuel vaccine hesitancy, and that is a fact.
Finally, my final question to you. Has India, rather than being a template for doom, now become a template for other nations on how a nation should respond, how a system should respond, and how a nation and its people should respond to a crisis, an emergency like this, going forward?
Right, absolutely, yes, I have. And going forward, I think most importantly, it is about securing our people.
Absolutely.
When we say securing our people, we mean securing them with enough vaccines, securing the world even. India has committed to 5 billion doses by the end of 2022. And we are going to and it's not just for our people, it's for the world. Because until everybody's safe, nobody is safe, right? And I believe that having spoken to some of the scientists advising the Prime Minister, that, unless we have a credible treatment, or a nasal vaccine available in a large quantity, we cannot call this, an endemic in any sort of way. So we have to, the fight is still on. We have to keep our guard up.
Priyamji, thank you. Thank you very, very much. We wish you all the best, and I look forward to reading the book in whole. A Nation to Protect. That's the effort, that's the achievement of India under Prime Minister Narendra Modi's leadership. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having